My husband disappeared for years, and I thought he was dead. But years later, he came back with a new son and a disgusting story. I came home from work thinking about nothing more than what I was going to make for dinner. My daughter was in the back seat whining about homework. The radio low, just another weekday. Turning onto our street, something felt off. His car was not in the driveway. On that shift, he usually beat us home and liked being the one already inside. That night, the porch light was on and the driveway was empty. Inside, the house felt wrong. Not scary, too quiet, no music, no pan on the stove, no sound of him talking to our daughter. She tossed her shoes in the hall and ran to the couch like it was any other night. I stood there with her backpack still on my shoulder, trying to believe there was a simple explanation. Late at work, stopped somewhere, phone dead, fine. I put my stuff down, checked my phone, and saw nothing from him. No text, no missed call. I called once. Straight to voicemail. My chest did that tight thing I always call overreacting. I told my daughter he was probably on his way, opened the front door again, stepped out on the porch, and called his name the same way I always did when he was running late. No answer. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the smell of the cereal bowl he left in the sink that morning. My daughter came running down the hallway in her socks, hair all wild, clutching the stuffed animal she drags everywhere. She slid on the floor, laughed, and then frowned when she looked past me. "Where is Dad?" she asked. I told her he was probably stuck at work and tried to make my voice sound normal. Inside, I already had that cold feeling starting in my chest, the one that says something is off, even if your brain is still writing excuses. I checked my phone, no text. I texted him anyway, then I called. Straight to voicemail. I told myself his phone must have died. I plugged in my own phone like that somehow helped, and started dinner like a robot, stirring, seasoning, checking the clock over and over. By the time it was fully dark outside and our daughter was in pajamas, I was pacing from the kitchen to the front window, pretending I was just checking the weather. I called his job. The woman at the front desk sounded tired in that way customer service people do. She said he had not clocked in at all. That was the moment my stomach dropped for real. I said there must be a mistake. She repeated it. He had not shown up. No call. Nothing. I called my mother with my voice shaking in that embarrassing way I hate. She did that thing where she tries to sound calm, but I could hear her moving around, grabbing her keys, telling my father in the background to get his jacket. They said they were coming. I called my in-laws. My mother-in-law went very quiet and then said they were on their way too. By the time everyone arrived, the living room looked like some weird vigil without the candles. My parents on one side of the couch, my in-laws on the other, my daughter curled up between them, watching their faces like she was trying to figure out just how scared she should be. We called the police that night and they told us to wait until morning. Apparently a grown man can just disappear for a bit and that is not technically an emergency. I get it, I really do. Adults have the right to walk away. But I did not sleep. I lay there in our bed staring at the empty space next to me, listening for the car that never pulled in, the key that never turned. Every time a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, my heart jumped. The next morning my parents drove me to the station because my hands would not stop shaking. Filing a missing person report feels like something other people do. People on the news, not a regular woman who still had to remember to pack a lunch for her kid. The officer asked routine questions in a bored voice. When did I last see him? Did we fight? Did he use any substances? Did he ever talk about leaving? I answered everything as honestly as I could, even when I felt like a suspect instead of a wife who had not slept. They checked the basic stuff, hospitals, accidents, jail, nothing. It was like he had stepped off the face of the earth. The days after that blurred together in this awful mix of normal and not normal. I still had to get my daughter dressed for school, still had to make sure there was food in the house, still had to wash dishes and pay bills. But now there were also calls from detectives, messages from worried coworkers, and that constant knot in my stomach. My parents started staying over on the couch so I would not be alone. My in-laws came by with casseroles and anxious eyes, sitting at the table like they were waiting for a knock on the door that would make everything make sense again. It never came. What did come were questions from everywhere. Friends calling, neighbors stopping me in the driveway, people from our community space asking if I had heard anything yet every time they saw me. I learned how to say no, nothing yet, with a tight little smile that made my cheeks hurt. At night, after my daughter finally fell asleep, I would sit on the couch scrolling through a social media app, reading articles about missing spouses, making myself sick imagining all the worst-case scenarios. I called his phone so many times the voicemail greeting started to feel like a ghost. I printed flyers with his picture. I never thought I would be that person, standing at a copy machine feeding it page after page of my husband's face. I handed them out at gas stations, put them on bulletin boards at the grocery store, taped them to light poles with my fingers going numb in the cold. My parents came with me, my in-laws too. People I barely knew helped share the post online. My mother-in-law cried in the passenger seat as we drove around town, clutching a stack of flyers to her chest like a lifeline. Weeks passed. The police did what they could, which honestly is not much when there is no car found in a ditch, no bank account drained, no obvious crime scene. They told me over and over that sometimes adults just leave. They said, "You would be surprised," in that quiet voice, and looked at me with pity. Maybe I should have listened more to that sentence. One afternoon, a few weeks in, the call came. A police officer asking me to come to the morgue to identify a body. There is no way to describe that moment without sounding dramatic. My legs just went out from under me. My mother grabbed the phone before it hit the floor. My father kept saying my name like he was trying to pull me back into the room with the sound of it. My in-laws showed up within minutes, like they had been waiting in their car outside. I do not remember the drive there. I remember the fluorescent lights and how cold it was, the sound of doors opening and closing somewhere behind us. I remember the way my mother-in-law's hand crushed mine, her knuckles white, the sheet, the smell, the way my mind tried to split in half, one part screaming that this could not be real, and the other part focusing on stupid details like the scuff marks on the floor. It was not him. I almost threw up from the shock of relief hitting the wall of guilt. Some other family was getting bad news that day. Some other wife, some other parents. We walked out of there with our legs still working, and I wanted to collapse in the parking lot anyway. On the drive home, my mother kept saying it was a sign that he must still be alive, that we had to keep faith. I nodded because I did not have any words left. You would think that would be the turning point where hope kicked in again. It was not. After that, something shifted in how people looked at me. The practical questions started. Did we have any debt? Was there any insurance? Had he been stressed? People whispered when they thought I could not hear. I caught phrases like midlife crisis and another family somewhere, and, you never really know a person. I started replaying every conversation we had in those last weeks. Every sigh. Every late night he said he needed time alone. Every time he stared at his plate a little too long. It felt like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the picture on the box blurred. The world does not stop just because your life has exploded. My job gave me a little time off, but after a while, the calls started coming. They were very polite about it. They said they understood my situation, but they needed to know when I would be back. Bills did not care that my husband was missing. Our mortgage did not care. The car loan did not care. My daughter still needed shoes that fit her growing feet. So I went back to work, walking into that office for the first time after everything was surreal. People looked at me like I was a walking news story. Some hugged me. Some avoided eye contact, like grief might be contagious. Someone had cleared my husband's picture off my desk without asking, probably thinking they were doing me a favor. I went into the bathroom and cried so hard I had to stuff paper towels into my mouth to keep quiet. I did my job anyway. Answered phones, filed paperwork, smiled at clients who had no idea that when I said, "Have a nice day," my brain was screaming, "My husband is gone." After work, I picked up my daughter, helped with homework, made dinner. Then I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, listening to the empty spot where his breathing used to be. At some point, surviving turns into making decisions you never thought you would have to make. The house that had once felt warm and full started to feel like a museum of a life that did not exist anymore. Every corner had a memory, and not the good kind. My daughter started asking why we still lived in Dad's house when he was not there. Our savings were not endless. The mortgage weighed on me like a concrete block. I talked with my parents. I talked with my in-laws. Even the detective said that. Realistically, after a certain amount of time with no activity, no evidence, you had to start planning for a future where he just was not coming back. That sentence shattered something in me and set something else free at the same time. I sold the house. People had opinions, of course. They always do. Some thought it was practical. Some thought it was heartless. A few people actually said it to my face, that it looked like I was moving on pretty fast. As if listing a place with a real estate agent was the same thing as forgetting your husband ever existed. I stopped going to certain community events because I could not deal with the stares. My parents helped me pack up the place. My father took down the pictures from the hallway one by one, carefully stacking them in a box while my mother quietly wrapped mugs in newspaper. My in-laws cried the day we walked through the empty rooms. My mother-in-law ran her hand along the doorway where we had marked my daughter's height in little lines. I promised we would never paint over those marks, which was a lie because the new owners did, obviously. My daughter clung to my leg. She was braver than I was, honestly. Kids are weirdly resilient until they are not. We moved into a smaller place across town, a little rental with thin walls and noisy neighbors and a view of the parking lot instead of the backyard where my daughter had learned to ride her bike. It was cramped and nothing matched. It was also something I could afford on my salary alone, which meant I could breathe a tiny bit easier at night. My parents came over with folding chairs. My mother-in-law brought curtains. My father-in-law fixed a loose cabinet door because he needed to fix something. Time did that thing it does, stretching and collapsing at the same time. A whole year passed, and sometimes it still felt like I was standing in that doorway with my keys in my hand, waiting for a car that never pulled into the driveway. Other times, it felt like my old life had happened to someone else. My daughter started at a new school, made new friends, stopped asking every single day when her father was coming back. She still had moments, though. Nights where she would crawl into my bed and whisper that she had a dream he was knocking on the door. I would hold her and remind her that we were safe, even though I did not know what that meant anymore. Around the 1-year mark, my in-laws showed up at our new place without warning. I remember because I was in leggings with a stain on the knee and a t-shirt I had slept in. They were both dressed nicer than usual, my mother-in-law in a blouse she normally saved for special occasions, my father-in-law in an actual button-down shirt. They sat at my tiny kitchen table, hands wrapped around cheap coffee mugs like they needed something to hold on to. My mother-in-law started crying almost immediately. My father-in-law cleared his throat over and over. Finally, he said they had sold some of their property. A small house they used to rent out, some land his own father had left him. They did not need it, he said. They were getting older. It was time to simplify. They wanted to give the money to their granddaughter. I just stared at them. They explained that it felt wrong to keep it sitting there while their son had walked away from his responsibilities. They could not make him come back, but they could at least try to make sure our daughter had some kind of security. The plan was to put most of it into a fund for her future, maybe college, maybe something else, and use the rest as a down payment so we could eventually stop renting. I argued, of course I did. I told them it was too much. I told them people would talk. They said people were already talking, and at least this way something good was happening. They reminded me that it was their money, their choice, and if their son ever got his act together, he could be mad at them in person. Word got out anyway. News like that always does in a town like ours. Suddenly, there were little posts on a social media app about certain people taking advantage of the elderly, with vague wording but very clear aim. I saw one comment thread where someone literally said I had waited just long enough to cash in. I sat on my couch shaking, phone in my hand, trying not to throw it against the wall. My in-laws defended me when they could, but I still had to live with those stares in the grocery store. I still had to stand in line at the bank behind someone who had shared that post. I still had to answer my own relatives when they called and asked if I was sure it was ethical to take that money. Ethical. Like I had orchestrated my own abandonment for a payout. We did use some of it for a down payment eventually. Not right away. It took me months to even make myself look at listings. When we finally moved into the little house on a quieter street, my daughter ran from room to room like it was a palace. We set up her bed first. We painted the walls together. I opened a separate account for the rest of the money and labeled it with my daughter's name. Every time I transferred a little bit more of my paycheck into that account, it felt like I was building a fortress brick by brick around her future. She still asked about her father sometimes. The older she got, the more pointed the questions became. Why he left, if he was dead, if I was sure, if there was something she did. That one hurt the most. I told her the truth I could live with, that he had made choices that had nothing to do with her worth, that he was the one missing out, that we were going to be okay anyway. For a while, that was our life. Me working, my parents helping, my in-laws coming over on weekends to take my daughter to the park. We created this strange, patched-together family that somehow worked even with the giant hole in the middle where my husband used to stand. Then, almost exactly 2 years after he disappeared, someone banged on my front door early on a school morning and ripped that fragile normal to shreds. I was in the kitchen making breakfast. My daughter was at the table drawing little hearts on the corner of a worksheet instead of actually doing it. The knock was too loud for that hour. That kind of heavy pounding that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked down the hallway, already rehearsing a speech in my head for some sales pitch I was going to shut down. I opened the door and there he was. I do not know how long I just stood there staring. Time did that thing where it stretches and snaps at the same time. He looked different and exactly the same. Thinner, maybe. Dark circles under his eyes. Same jaw, same way he always pushed his hair back when he was nervous. He was standing on my porch like he had just stepped out to get the mail. And next to him, tucked into a stroller, was a baby. My brain refused to connect the dots at first. I stepped forward. I heard myself say his name. My whole body flooded with something that felt like relief and fury fighting for space. I threw my arms around him before I could stop myself, sobbing into his jacket, asking a million questions at once. Where had he been? What happened? Was he okay? Why had he not called? Why had he not called? Why had he not called? He kept saying my name, his hands awkward on my back. There was this weird delay in his voice, like he was answering from far away. I did not even look at the stroller for the first few seconds. When I finally pulled back enough to see the baby's face, my brain finally caught up. The baby was too big to be a newborn, old enough to look right at me and grab at the zipper on my hoodie. Dark hair, little round cheeks, a blanket tucked around tiny legs. The baby looked up at me like I was just some stranger who had interrupted a walk. Something in me went ice cold. Behind me, I heard my daughter's footsteps thump down the hallway. She peeked around my arm and froze. Her whole body went stiff. Her mouth fell open. She whispered, "Dad," in this tiny voice that cracked right down the middle. He looked over my shoulder and smiled, but it was this weak, guilty thing that made me want to slam the door shut right then. I did not slam it. Not yet. I stepped back, pulled my daughter behind me like a shield. I asked him again where he had been. He said he wanted to explain, that he needed to come inside, that it was a long story. I looked at the stroller again, and suddenly the long story did not feel that complicated. My chest started to burn. All the missing nights, the whispers, the half-thought-out theories people had thrown around, they all crashed into one ugly picture. I told him he could talk from the porch. He begged. He tried that soft voice he used to use when he wanted to calm me down after an argument, saying we should not do this in front of our daughter. I could feel my daughter shaking behind me. I told him if he did not start talking right there, I was closing the door and calling the police just to have them on record that he was alive. So he talked. He said there had been someone else, a woman from work, that it started as just talking during late shifts and turned into something else, that it had been going on longer than he wanted to admit, that when she got pregnant, everything spun out of control. He could not face me, he said. He could not face our daughter, my parents, his parents. He said he had packed a bag and driven off with this plan to figure it out somewhere else, and it had all just kept going from there. I do not know if there is a right way to find out your husband did not just vanish. He chose to walk away and start a whole second life with someone else. But I am pretty sure on your front porch in front of your kid while a baby stares at you is pretty high on the list of worst options. He talked about moving to another state with the woman, about living with some relatives of hers, about trying to make it work. He said she changed her mind after the baby came, that she had wanted an escape from her own mess, not a real family, that raising a child with a man who had already abandoned one family turned out to be less romantic than she thought. He said she left. Just up and left one day, no forwarding address, no goodbye. She left a letter and a baby, and that was it. He said he had driven back because he had nowhere else to go. He said it like he was telling me about car trouble, like this was all just some unfortunate series of events that had happened to him, instead of a long chain of choices he had made on purpose. He kept trying to slide in phrases like, I was not in my right mind, and I was so depressed, and I did not want to hurt you. I could see the story he had built in his head, the one where he was some tragic figure who got pulled in too deep by circumstances. I snapped. All that numb ice inside me cracked open and something molten came pouring out. I do not even remember exactly what I said first. I know there was a lot of, how dare you, and you left your daughter, and you let me think you were dead. There was also a lot of swearing. My daughter started crying again, louder this time, hands over her ears. The baby in the stroller started wailing too, because of course he did. I told him he needed to leave, right then. I told him he had made his choice when he drove away from this house the first time without so much as a note. I told him I did not care about his long story. I did not care about his excuses. I did not care that his second life had blown up in his face. I told him I did not want him, or his lies, or his baby anywhere near the life I had scraped back together from the mess he left. He tried to pull the "but the baby is innocent" card. Of course he did. He said I was punishing a child for the sins of the parents. He tried to guilt-trip me with my own faith, asking what kind of compassionate person would turn away a helpless baby. He looked at our daughter like she might help his case. She flinched. That was it for me. I told him if he did not leave my porch in that exact moment, I would call the police and tell them that the missing person they had been looking for had just shown up. And by the way, Here was the man who had abandoned his child for years and then tried to drop another baby on his ex-wife's doorstep. I told him I would file for any legal thing I could find with his name on it. I told him I was done being the soft place he landed when he blew up his own life. He stood there for a second, looking at me like he did not recognize the person in front of him. Then he grabbed the stroller handle, muttered something I did not catch, and backed down the steps. I closed the door. My daughter collapsed against me, sobbing. I slid down the wall with her, heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. I could hear him out there for a while, pacing on the porch, then walking away, then a car door slamming. Eventually, the sound faded. I sat on the floor with my daughter in my lap, both of us shaking, and tried to figure out how to explain any of this to a child who still slept with the nightlight on. After I got her calmed down and settled in her room with a movie, I called my in-laws. Telling them their son was alive and had just shown up at my door with a baby was one of the strangest conversations I have ever had. My mother-in-law made this sound I had never heard from a human throat before, something between a sob and a scream. My father-in-law went very quiet. They said they were coming over. I told them not to. I told them they needed to stay home in case he went there next. They agreed, reluctantly. Before we hung up, my father-in-law said, in this hoarse voice I had never heard before, "Thank you for calling us, even after everything." Of course he went there. A few hours later, my phone buzzed nonstop with calls and texts. My in-laws told me he had shown up at their house with the same story, the same baby, the same sad eyes. He had tried to paint himself as a man who had been through unspeakable things, who had lost himself and was now ready to be forgiven. They had listened. Then my father-in-law, who used to apologize for raising his voice even a little, told him to sit down because they needed to talk about the money. I was not there, obviously, but I know my in-laws. I can picture it. The quiet kitchen, the old clock ticking on the wall, the stack of bills in a little basket on the counter. I can see my mother-in-law wringing her hands in her lap, and my father-in-law finally saying the words their son never expected to hear. They told him about the property, about selling the little rental house and the parcel of land, about giving the money to their granddaughter because they thought their son was either dead or gone for good. They told him it was done. No takebacks. No secret account with his name on it. He lost it. According to my father-in-law, he went from sad and sorry to furious in about 3 seconds. He accused them of betrayal. He said I had manipulated them. He used words like brainwashed and gold digger and my inheritance. He banged his fist on their table so hard a mug fell over. The baby started crying again. My mother-in-law had to pick him up and walk around the kitchen while her grown son yelled at her for giving away money that he had, in his mind, already spent. My father-in-law, who had always been the peacemaker, stood up and told him to get out. He told him that inheritance was not a guarantee, that nothing in life was a guarantee, and that if he wanted to talk about people being taken advantage of, maybe he should go look at the little girl he had abandoned and the baby he was dragging from house to house like luggage. He told him he loved him, but he would not reward this kind of behavior. He said the money had gone to the only person in this whole mess who had done nothing wrong, their granddaughter. That was the first clash. It was not the last. When he realized he was not getting a check from his parents, he shifted tactics. He went online. You have no idea how fast a half-truth can turn into a full-blown story when people want drama. It started with a picture, some old shot of him and his parents in front of a house with a caption about family homes and promises. Then there was a long paragraph about how his soon-to-be ex had convinced his elderly parents to sign everything over to her daughter, leaving him with nothing. He never mentioned the part where he conveniently forgot to show up for his own life for years. The post took off in our small corner of the internet. People love to feel like they are standing up for the underdog, especially when that underdog is a man spinning a story about a cold ex and a heartless system. Comments poured in. People shared it with outraged emojis. There were entire threads about modern wives and money-hungry women and men not being protected. I watched it happen on my cracked phone screen, my own face nowhere in the pictures and yet somehow plastered over every word. Strangers called me every name you can imagine without ever having met me. People who knew us a little but not enough chimed in. A woman I used to sit behind in community gatherings shared the post with a caption about, "This is why marriage is scary for men now." I saw it all. I sat on my couch with my daughter playing on the floor nearby and scrolled until my thumb hurt, feeling like I was watching my life get rewritten in real time by the man who had detonated it in the first place. The offline fallout was just as ugly. I had people corner me in the parking lot of the grocery store asking if it was true that I had forced his parents to give me their house. Someone actually said, "Must be nice to get rich off someone else's hard work." while I stood there holding a carton of eggs and a bag of apples. I wanted to scream that I was still clipping coupons and checking my bank balance before filling my tank, but I knew it would not matter. He did not stop at words. He started showing up places. At my daughter's school, hanging back near the parking lot at dismissal time, just close enough for her to see him, far enough that it was hard to make a scene. She would freeze when she spotted him, then bolt to my car and slam the door. The first time it happened, she shook for an hour. I marched into the school the next day and told them everything. They were supportive, but there are limits to what they can do without a court paper in hand. So I got the court paper. Filing for a restraining order is not glamorous. There is no dramatic music, no inspiring speeches. It is just forms and waiting rooms and explaining your pain to people who have heard far worse. I told them about the abandonment, the sudden return, the baby on my porch, the online campaign, the appearances at school. I felt like I was reading from a script I did not remember agreeing to act out. Eventually, a tired-looking judge signed a piece of paper that basically said he needed to stay away from me and from our daughter's school. It was something, at least on paper. My in-laws tried to reason with him. They asked him to stop posting, to stop showing up, to think about the damage he was doing, not just to me, but to his own child. He listened just long enough to twist their words after. When people pointed out that his parents were defending me online, he started hinting that they were senile, that I had filled their heads with lies, that they were not what they used to be. I watched him cannibalize his own support system in real time. And then, because apparently the bar for his behavior had not been lowered enough yet, he pulled his most predictable move. He disappeared again. This time, though, he did not vanish alone. He left the baby behind. It happened on a random morning at my in-laws' house. They had caved and let him stay with them for a little while after he showed up with more apologies and promises. I get it. They are parents. Hope is stubborn. Hope. They set rules. He would look for work. He would help with the baby. He would not drink. He would not bring drama into their home. For a couple of weeks, it actually looked like he might follow through. He did a few odd jobs. He took the baby on walks. He even went to a community meeting with them like old times. Then one morning, my mother-in-law woke up to the sound of the baby crying and realized the house felt wrong. Too quiet in that specific way. She went to the guest room. The bed was empty. His bag was gone. The closet was open. The baby was in the crib alone, diaper full, face red from crying. On the kitchen table, there was a scrap of paper with a few sentences scribbled in his rushed handwriting. Something about needing space, and you love him more than I ever could, and you already picked your side with the money. He had walked out again, left his son behind like a bag of trash. My mother-in-law called me sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. My father-in-law got on the phone and said they did not know what to do, that they could not handle a baby that young full-time, that they were too old, too tired, too broken by all of this. I drove over there immediately, my daughter in the back seat with wide eyes, clutching her stuffed toy like it could ward off the reality of what we were walking into. Seeing that baby in their living room was surreal. He was sitting on a blanket surrounded by toys, cheeks sticky from tears, his little hands grabbing at anything within reach. He had no idea his father had left, again. No idea how many bridges had been burned over his short life already. I picked him up and he settled against me like he had known me for years instead of moments. My heart twisted. I did not want another child. I did not want anything that tied me any closer to the man who had done this. But I am not made of stone. My in-laws started reaching out for help. They talked to social services, to a woman at their community center who knew someone in another state where the baby's mother had supposedly gone. They posted in private groups online with pictures, asking if anyone recognized the woman. They got ignored, then yelled at for airing dirty laundry, then finally slowly responses from people who actually wanted to help. After a few months of this, one of those messages turned into a real lead. A woman who worked in a retail store in a different town saw the picture and thought the baby looked like a child she had seen in an old photo on a coworker's phone. Same dark hair, same eyes. That coworker was the woman my husband had left me for. The baby's mother. Turns out she had been living under the radar in this small town, working, paying rent, trying to pretend the entire disaster she had helped create had never happened. When my in-laws' contact finally reached her, she denied it at first, said it was not her, said she did not know any man by that name. Then, faced with more pictures and the threat of formal reports, she broke down and admitted the truth. She told them she had been overwhelmed, that she had panicked, that she had never actually wanted a baby. She had wanted a man to rescue her from her old life and then realized she had just traded one mess for another. She said she thought my husband would be a good father because he talked so much about the daughter he had left behind, which is honestly the most twisted sentence I have ever heard. At first, she still did not want to take the baby back. She said she did not have the money, the space, the emotional capacity. My in-laws, and later a social worker, laid it out very clearly. The baby could not stay with two senior citizens who were already stretched thin. Either she stepped up and took responsibility, or things were going to escalate into legal territory she could not control. Under that pressure, she agreed to come. When she walked into my in-laws' living room for the first time, it was like watching a ghost in a mirror. She was younger than me, but stress had carved lines into her face. She looked at the baby like he was both hers and a stranger's. He reached for her after a hesitant moment, and something in her softened. I was there, off to the side, holding a mug of coffee with both hands because otherwise they would have been shaking. She would not meet my eyes. I did not really want her to. She apologized, eventually, to my in-laws mostly, for leaving them with the baby, for the chaos. She did not say much to me, just a quiet, "I am sorry," that covered absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. I nodded because what else was there to do? None of us could undo any of it. We could only move pieces around and try to make sure this baby did not become another casualty of my husband's selfishness. She took the baby with her when she left. There was a lot of paperwork, some court dates, a whole tangle of logistics I honestly was not involved in beyond giving permission for my name to be used as someone with information about his father's pattern. I went back to my life, back to work, back to school pickups, back to making dinner while my daughter told me about her day. Online, the noise started to quiet down. People moved on to the next scandal. A few of them sent me private messages saying they were sorry they had believed him. Those apologies landed like pebbles in a deep well. I said thank you because that is what you do. But it did not erase the damage. Social services called me a few times after that, asking more questions about my husband's behavior, his history, the way he handled money, the way he had left. Apparently, the baby's mother had decided she wanted to pursue child support. I did not blame her. She had made terrible choices. Yes, but she was trying now. Meanwhile, somewhere out there, my husband was probably spinning another story about being the victim of cruel women and an unfair system. Months passed. Honestly, at that point, I kind of forgot he was a person who needed to eat and work and pay rent. In my mind, he was just this floating problem, like a storm cloud always on the horizon. Then one afternoon, my phone rang, and I found out that he had finally discovered what happens when you try to outrun paperwork in a country that loves paperwork more than anything. Apparently, in order to pay for his new disappearing act, he had gotten a job under his real name again. Some boring office position, from what I heard through the grapevine. The thing about getting a job under your real name when there are active cases with your social security number attached is that the system notices. The child support case for the baby pinged his employment. A notice went out. Court dates were set. He did not show up to any of them, because of course he did not. Eventually, a judge got tired of the no-shows and issued a warrant. He got pulled over for something stupid. A rolling stop. A broken tail light. Whatever it was, the officer ran his information, saw the warrant, and that was that. I found out because my in-laws called me, voices shaking. They had been notified as emergency contacts. Hearing that your husband is in custody because he could not be bothered to show up to court to talk about supporting the children he abandoned is one of those moments where the universe stops pretending it is subtle. My feelings were a mess. On one hand, there was this ugly, petty satisfaction, like the universe had finally pulled the emergency brake on a train that had been barreling through all of us. On the other hand, there was dread. I knew my daughter was going to hear about it. I knew it would rip open wounds that were barely scabbed over. Sure enough, the news trickled down the kid grapevine. Someone's parent mentioned something within earshot of someone else, and within days my daughter came home from school with her shoulders hunched and her eyes too big. "Is Dad in jail?" she asked, standing in the kitchen doorway clutching her backpack like a shield. I closed my eyes for a second. Then I told her the truth, in kid terms. That he had not followed rules about taking care of his responsibilities. That a judge had said there were consequences. That he was somewhere safe, not hurt, but not free to just come and go as he pleased anymore. She listened, chewing on her lip. That night she had nightmares and wet the bed for the first time in a long time. I washed the sheets in the middle of the night while she slept on the couch, cartoons playing softly to cover the sound of my quiet crying. He was released eventually, of course. The system is not built to keep men like him locked up for long. He made some kind of deal. He agreed to a structured payment plan for child support, not just for the baby, but for our daughter too once the case was expanded. I know this because I was suddenly on the radar in a whole new way. Up until that point, I had not formally filed for anything. I had just been surviving, paying bills, raising our child, telling myself that I did not need his money. I had a lot of pride mixed in there, if I am honest. I did not want to be the ex who dragged him to court, even if he deserved every legal headache. Watching him face consequences with the other child shook something loose in me. A woman from a legal aid office sat across from me one day at a plain table and laid it out. I had the right to file for back support, for future support, for something, anything, that acknowledged on paper that he had a financial responsibility to the human he had helped bring into the world and then walked away from. She told me it would not undo the years I had struggled, but it could make things a little less tight. She also said something that stuck with me. This is not about revenge. It is about accountability. I thought about my daughter's college fund, about how hard I had worked to build it, about the way my in-laws had given up their property so she would not be punished for her father's choices, about how he had screamed at them about that money like it had always been his by divine right. I thought about every night I had lain awake doing mental math with the numbers in my bank account, trying to figure out what bill could be paid a little late without shutting off a service. So I filed. The process was as exhausting and humiliating as you would expect. I had to pull together pay stubs, bank statements, proof of expenses, proof of his absence. I had to explain over and over that no, he had not sent money, not even once, not even a small amount, not even for birthdays or holidays. I had to sit in a waiting room with other women in similar situations, all of us staring at our phones and pretending we were not listening to each other's names being called. When it was finally our turn in front of the judge, he tried to play the same song. He talked about mental health, about being overwhelmed, about not being able to find steady work, about how the situation with the other child had already strapped him financially. He hinted that I was comfortable now with the house and the help from his parents, as if that canceled out his obligation. The judge, thankfully, did not seem impressed. He pointed out the years of absence, the record of his online behavior, the trail of no-shows to previous hearings. He looked at my stack of documents, then at my husband, and said something like, "This is not about punishing you for being a flawed human. This is about enforcing your responsibilities as a parent." Then he put numbers on paper. Not huge numbers. The system never really makes them huge. But enough to say officially that my husband owed something. To our daughter. To the baby he had left behind twice. The first payment showed up a few weeks later. It was smaller than it should have been because they took a portion for back support owed to the other child. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the deposit notice on my phone. My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to reject it, to send it back, to prove that I did not need his money. Another part of me saw my daughter's name attached to that account and thought about the future apartments she might rent, the textbooks she might buy, the airports she might walk through someday chasing a life that was not built on fear. I left the money where it was. The payments have never been consistent. Some months they are on time, some months they are late. A few months they do not show up at all and then double up later. Every time I see one, I remember that somewhere out there, he is clocking in and out of some job, probably complaining to coworkers about his crazy ex and unfair courts, while the system quietly siphons off a piece of his check and slides it into an account with our daughter's name on it. I do not forgive him. I know people love stories where the woman finds peace and lets go and maybe even thanks the mess for making her stronger, but that is not what this is. I moved forward. That is different. I built a life for my daughter and me out of the wreckage he left. I leaned on my parents and my in-laws and friends who saw through his online performance and stuck by me anyway. I went to work even when my eyes were swollen from crying. I painted walls and hung curtains and fixed leaky faucets and figured out how to fill out forms that used to have his name on them. My daughter is older now. She knows more than I wish she did. Kids always do. She remembers the night I opened the door and found him standing there with that stroller. She remembers the way my body went rigid, the way my voice changed. She knows he has another child out there somewhere. She knows he went away again. She knows that money shows up sometimes that has his name on it in tiny letters on a statement. She also knows that her grandfather has never missed a school concert, that her grandmother always answers the phone on the first ring, that my father taught her how to ride a bike in the parking lot of our first tiny rental. She asked me once if I regretted anything. Not in those words exactly. She said, "If you could go back and not marry Dad, would you?" I told her the truth, that I regret the way I shrank myself for him, the way I ignored my own instincts, the way I let him talk over my fear and my doubt and my anger until I could not hear myself. I said I would change that if I could, but I would not change her. She is the one thing that came out of all of this that is pure and good. If I had to walk through hell to get her, then fine. I would still want her on the other side. Sometimes when the house is quiet and my brain tries to drag me back into old memories, I still get flashes. The sound of that first voicemail that never came. The fluorescent lights in the morgue. The weight of the flyers in my hand. The look on my in-laws' faces when they told me about the money. The feel of my daughter's small fingers digging into my arm when she saw her father on our porch again for the last time. I also get other flashes now. My daughter laughing with my father over some silly inside joke. My mother teaching her how to make a recipe that has been passed down through generations. My in-laws sitting on my couch at my new house, watching her open presents, their eyes bright and soft at the same time. Little scenes of a life that is not the one I planned, but is still a life, still ours. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not some neat thing you can fit on a picture with a sunset behind it. It is messy and uncomfortable. It is this. Sometimes the person who blows up your life never gets better. They do not have a redemption arc. They do not come back with flowers and a sincere apology and a new job and a therapist and a promise to make it right. Sometimes they just keep being exactly who they are, and the only thing you can do is stop standing where the debris will land. I stopped standing there. I do not know where he is now. I hear bits and pieces, that he is working somewhere new, that he is telling people a new version of our story where he is less at fault, that he still complains about the money, about the ungrateful women who ruined his life. Maybe some people believe him. Maybe some do not. It does not really matter anymore. What matters is that my daughter and I are here, that there is a roof over our heads and food on our table and people in our lives who show up when they say they will. That when the porch light comes on at night, it is because I flipped the switch. That when someone knocks on my door now, my first thought is not, is this the police? Or, is this a ghost? It is, did my friend drop by? Or, is this a package I forgot I ordered? The fear is not all gone. I still jump when unknown numbers pop up on my phone. I still tense when I see a car that looks like the one he used to drive. I still have a folder in my emails with every legal document, every order, every confirmation, because a part of me is always ready to prove, again, what he did and what I survived. But I also have something else now. A quiet, boring, beautiful kind of stability that I used to think only other people got. Nights where the biggest drama is my daughter refusing to put her plate in the sink. Mornings where I drink my coffee while the sun comes up and no one is missing. Holidays where the only tension is whether my mother's side dish will turn out right. A future that feels like it belongs to us, not to his chaos. He can keep running from himself if he wants to. The system will keep catching up in small ways, nibbling at his paycheck, pulling him back into courtrooms, reminding him on paper of the lives he tried to abandon. That is between him and whatever conscience he has left. Me? I am done chasing ghosts. I live with the living now. I live with the people who answered when I called in the worst night of my life and kept answering over and over, even when the story got messier and uglier and more complicated than any of us wanted. Rain still comes sometimes. Bad weather still crashes into my days when I least expect it. But I have learned how to close windows, how to roll up rugs, how to hold on until it passes. I have learned that I am allowed to lock my door, literally and metaphorically, even when someone on the other side is knocking and crying and telling me they have changed. I can love my daughter fiercely, respect my in-laws' grief, appreciate my parents' help, and still keep that lock firmly in place when it comes to him. That is not bitterness. That is survival. That is what it looks like when a woman finally realizes that she does not have to set herself on fire to keep a man warm, no matter how many stories he tells about the cold. And because life does not magically turn into a movie just because you survived something huge, the next part was not some dramatic new chapter. It was a lot of boring hard work with little pockets of quiet drama sprinkled in, the kind no one posts about because it does not get many likes. There was the time a woman from my old community space cornered me in the cereal aisle and said, in that fake, sweet voice, that she hoped I was enjoying the house his parents paid for. I could feel my blood rush to my face. For a second, I pictured myself unloading the whole story on her right there between the oatmeal and the pancake mix. Instead, I took a breath and said very calmly that their granddaughter's future was none of her concern. Then I picked up my cereal and walked away. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the box, but my daughter, who was with me, slipped her hand into mine and squeezed. Later that night, she told me she was proud of me for not yelling. I laughed because if she had seen the speech inside my head, she would know how close it had been. There were nights when the loneliness felt heavy, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the dishwasher humming, and I would catch myself glancing at the empty chair across from me at the table. Not because I missed him exactly, but because my brain was still wired for another adult to be there. I started inviting my parents over more for dinner, or my friend from work who loved to talk about her own messy ex. We would sit at my little table, eat pasta out of chipped bowls, and laugh until we cried about the things we had once thought were acceptable in relationships. There were school events, too. Those hit differently. Sitting in a crowded gym while kids sang off key and held up construction paper art, with glue strings still hanging off. I would scan the room automatically, some old part of my nervous system looking for his face even though I knew he was not going to be there. My parents came. My in-laws came when they could. My daughter would wave at us from the risers like we were her whole world. In those moments, for that half hour or whatever, the story was simple again. Just a kid and her little cheering section. Then the school would send home forms for emergency contact updates, and there it was again, his blank line staring up at me. At first, I left it as father with no number, like a placeholder for a ghost. Eventually, after one too many times of seeing staff squint at that empty space, I crossed it out and wrote, "See grandparents." It felt like erasing something and correcting it at the same time. My in-laws carried their own quiet grief. My mother-in-law still kept a framed picture of him on a shelf, but over time, more pictures of our daughter crowded around it. Sometimes I would catch her looking at that old photo, with tears in her eyes. And I knew she was mourning, not just the man he had become, but the boy he used to be, the one I had never met. We never really talked about it directly. Instead, we traded practical kindnesses. I fixed things around their house that they could not reach. They dropped off soup when my daughter got sick. We held each other up without dissecting every feeling like we were in some kind of support group. Work slowly shifted from place I drag myself to while my life burns down, to place I go for a few hours a day where no one expects me to talk about my personal tragedy. A woman in my office who had once given me pity eyes started inviting me to lunch instead, not to grill me about my situation, but to gossip about our boss and complain about the printer. That might not sound like much, but when your identity has been boiled down to the one with the missing husband, being treated like a whole person again feels like oxygen. I made small changes too. I switched the route I drove home, so I did not have to pass certain streets that punched me in the gut. I boxed up the last of his old shirts and gave them to a donation center a few towns over, so I would not risk seeing some stranger wearing one at the gas station. I went through my social media accounts and quietly removed people who had piled on when he made his little victim posts. No dramatic call-outs, no big speeches, just digital house cleaning. Click, gone, sanity saved. Every once in a while, his name would pop up again. Someone would mention seeing him somewhere, or I would get a thin white envelope with some new update about payments or a minor court adjustment. The first few times, my hands shook so hard I could barely open the mail. After a while, it became just another annoying piece of adult life, like a bill. I would scan for anything important, file it in my growing folder, and move on. Not that I never spiraled. There were nights when I would lie awake replaying everything and get angry all over again, even at people who had tried their best. I would think about the early days of our marriage, before everything cracked, and wonder where exactly the line was between normal relationship problems and the moment he started becoming the man who could drive away without a word. It is tempting to go back in your mind and try to find the first red flag, the one you could have cut down if you had been a little braver, a little less in love with the idea of your life. But here is what I landed on, after way too many late-night overthinking sessions. I cannot go back and fix the younger me. I can only honor her by not throwing her under the bus now. She did the best she could with what she knew. I know more now. That is the point. So I started letting myself want things again. Nothing wild. I did not suddenly decide to quit my job and move across the country or anything like that. It was smaller stuff at first. Taking a weekend class on something I liked. Not something practical. Buying a candle that smelled nice without checking if it was on sale 3 times. Saying yes when a coworker invited me to a painting night, even though I was convinced my version would look like something a toddler did with their eyes closed. There was also the whole, will I ever date again question floating around like an annoying balloon I did not ask for. People love asking that, by the way. As if romance is the final exam you have to pass after a breakup to prove you are truly healed. My answer, for a long time, was a very firm no. Not because I hated all men or anything dramatic like that, but because I genuinely did not have the energy to share my closet, my couch, or my emotional bandwidth with anyone else. Over time, that no softened into more of a not right now, and also if I ever do this again, he is going to have to clear a very high bar. I do not know if I will get there. If I do, it will be on my terms. There will be no secret second lives. No mysterious missing phones. No men who treat honesty like a favor they hand out when it is convenient. What I did commit to, fully, was being honest with my daughter in age-appropriate ways. As she grew, the questions changed. When she was little, it was, "Is Dad coming home?" Later it turned into, "Did I do something wrong?" Now it is more like, "Why do some people still believe his side of things when there is proof he is lying?" That one is hard. I tell her truth does not always win the popularity contest at first. I tell her people cling to stories that make them feel comfortable, even when the facts poke holes in them. I tell her our job is to live in a way that we can sleep at night, not to win arguments with strangers. I also tell her that her father's choices are not a reflection of her value. Over and over. In different words, in different moments. When she fails a test, when a friend hurts her feelings, when she looks in the mirror and frowns at some new change in her growing body. I repeat it so often that sometimes I catch her saying a version of it to herself in the hallway mirror before school, and I have to step into the bathroom for a second so she does not see me tearing up. My parents shifted around me in quiet ways. My mother stopped talking to me like I was about to fall apart, and one night at my kitchen table, she actually apologized. She admitted that at the beginning she had tried to excuse what he did, blaming stress or saying maybe I had been too hard on him because the idea that he had simply chosen to walk away was too much to face. Hearing her say that loosened something in me. My father did not make speeches, but he started treating me like an equal instead of a kid he had to rescue, bringing his toolbox over, eating at my table, telling me in this calm way that I was strong. My in-laws poured their love into our daughter instead of defending their son. They became the grandparents who sit on hard chairs in crowded rooms and clap the loudest. They send cards with a few dollars for her savings and notes that say, "For your future." They cannot undo what he did, but they are clearly on her side. From the outside, our life looks boring now. Most nights are homework on the table, dishes in the sink, my daughter arguing about bedtime. On weekends, we see family or stay home and watch a movie we already know by heart. No big drama, no calls to the police, no posts about me spreading like gossip. Just days where no one vanishes and no one turns our life into a spectacle. I still flinch when an unknown number pops up or when I see a car that looks like his, but the fear does not sit in my throat the way it used to. It passes. He can tell whatever version of the story he wants. I am done living in reaction to a man who walked away from his own child. So this is where I am now, in a small house with a kid who knows she is loved, with family who shows up, with a front porch light that I turn on myself before I lock the door at night. If he ever appears there again, I will not be the woman who drops her keys. I will be the one who keeps the lock between us and guards the life my daughter and I built out of the mess he left. For the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.